all healthy Christian culture is going to flow from healthy Christian community.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you don't, if you don't have that Christian community, there's going to be another community that becomes your home, and then over time, when that new home, that new culture becomes your home and your culture, it affects your art.
Mm-hmm.
It can't help but do that.
Stay tuned for the show. Poets at War is sponsored by the following.
Hello, I'm Sarah Levesque, Editor-in-Chief of Logo Sophia magazine. I would like to invite you to explore our Pilgrim's Journal of Life, Love, and Literature, both in visual format and in podcast format. Our goal is to help bridge the gaps between different Christian denominations and traditions. Please visit our website at logosophiamag.com to read or listen to stories, articles, poetry, and more, all for free. We look forward to journeying with you.
Today on Poets at War, we speak with Pastor Toby Sumpter of Cross Politic and Having Two Legs about living in community with your fellow artists and even more, the kingdom of God. Join us in the trenches for Poets at War.
God of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betray thee, one sword at least thy right shall guard, one faithful heart shall praise thee.
The thing I wanted to get on and talk about was, you gave a barn burner of a talk saying everything I've been saying forever, and Jason Farley and other guys like us at the Fight Laugh Feast conference about using great stories to build the imaginations of your children, so that when they're in the fourth quarter, when they're in the behind enemy lines, they're going to be when they have to use their imagination, when they're forced to use their imagination, beyond whatever, they're gonna remember not only your Shadrach, Meshachs, and Abednego's, but also your Aragorns and everything else, right? So.
Right.
It's just one of those things. It's like, well, how can I be noble? How can I be strong where I'm at right now? What does that even look like, right? And so I wanted to get into that some, but also the first Fight Last Beast conference I went to, which was the second for you guys in Lebanon, we had a conversation, and there was some other stuff Doug said and some other folks about you're not crazy, specifically in relation to artists that really are called by God to do whatever, and even if they're not, as a hobby, just raising their family, right? Mm-hmm. Poets at War, our kind of tagline is "Be your family's bard," right? Do not turn to the right or to the left. The Lord will be with you wherever you go. That's the way from Joshua. Yeah. But the point is, like, not just raising your family, but wherever you have influence, wherever you have and imagination is something really easy to influence, as we've seen in our culture today, one way or the other. Just right. Kind words, you've given me kind words, and it's really sparked me in random ways, that you probably never thought of when you were saying a kind word. You just gave a kind word. So Doug did a blog on "You're not crazy." Like, this needs to be the thing that we're saying to each other at Sunday school, or Sunday every day, or every week, right? You're not crazy for wanting to start your business. You're not crazy for this, that, and the other. And unfortunately, especially in the South, there seems to be the Southeast, especially, there seems to be a lot of animosity toward, and I'm going to get into why I think that is at some point, but I want to hear from you before that. A lot of animosity toward artists for various reasons. And it's something that I'm wondering, like, how do we get churches to kind of not take them more seriously than they need to be, because some of them take themselves way too seriously. Right. But how is this give and take going to come about if we start seeing reformation in this area?
Yeah. It seems to me that you have at least two major dynamics going on. One is deeply embedded in the history of the church, which is just a general skepticism of beauty and the arts. Mm-hmm. So this goes back to the early church. Love the early church fathers. They did a lot of good things, and some of them were better than others on this. But you go back to the early church fathers, and there's a real skepticism about art and beauty, and I think understandably, because art and beauty had been used by pagans for centuries to seduce the masses, and then even in the first few centuries of the church, I think that temptation was still strong. They've got the beautiful pagan temples, they've got the plays, they've got the arts, they've got the theater, they've got the poetry. And so I think understandably, the early church fathers, broadly, I would say, said, watch out, stay away. It was the, basically the modern equivalent of, burn all your old records, don't
Right.
don't have cable television, don't go to the movies, don't have Spotify, it was just cut yourself off from this. It's so bad, it's garbage, it's awful, and they were right in many respects that it was seductive, it was awful, it was foul, it was perverse. And, we live in a cesspool again. And so I would say, I think it seems to me that there's just sort of a strong current running through the history of the church that has been skeptical of beauty, imagination, and the arts.
Right.
And has seen them as these really, really, if not inherently evil, inherently dangerous, seductive. Eve saw that the fruit looked good. The devil successfully awakened her imagination in a sinful way to imagine disobeying God, and that, and I think again, that's understandable. It goes all the way back to the fall, and and we see this throughout Scripture, the warnings of not being seduced by the beauty of the allure of a woman in sexual sin, but I think by the same token, the beauty, the allure of the paganism of the nations. I mean, why did Israel continuously fall into idolatry? Why were they attracted to the pagan nations? Well, they had there was a lot of it had to do with beauty. A lot of it had to do with imagination and the arts and what we would call sort of cultural sophistication. We had, Israel had a fancy tent and the nations had, these shrines with, gold and, and these, animals and, rituals and so on. And so I think there's always been, both on the one hand, a real life temptation with the imagination, arts, beauty. And then I think because of that, I think there has been a long historic skepticism and leaning away from that. Be careful, be careful, be careful. Maybe don't even do it. That's probably a bad idea. You're probably going to screw it up. And then I would say the other thing that's a major contributing factor to the problem and the reason why we're in this position that we're in is that a bunch of Christians really have screwed it up.
Oh yeah.
And I think, we tend to screw it up in a couple ways. We tend to screw it up either by just making junk, and we put Jesus fish on it and crosses and Bible verses and sell Jesus junk in Jesus junk stores like your local Christian gift shop, so we tell stupid stories. We tell. Everything has this sort of corny, cheesy, moralistic, sentimental, point, or it's just not very good. It's just lame. It's whatever. We fail that direction, and after a while, Christians are like, that was like I spent like a lot of time and a lot of money on junk, man, and that gets a bad taste in your mouth, and that feels like you got ripped off and gypped. And then on the other side, maybe particularly with those artists that are gifted, in particular, they see the junk. They don't want to do that. And so, but the only sort of examples they have, or some of the only few examples they have of quality art, is from the pagans. And they creep right up to this edge, and then one after another, they fall off.
Yeah.
And we find out a few years later, I'm not a Christian anymore. I went mainstream, and whatever, they've compromised, they left their wife, this kind of thing. And sort of both of those failures of Christians to actually make beautiful things, and in a way that is still full of Christian integrity. Both of those things puts a bad taste in Christians' mouths, and they're like, why would we do that? Either we're paying you to create junk, or we're paying you to apostatize in 10 years. Mm-hmm. And in both directions, it seems like a risk that's not worth it. And so, I mean, that's a broad answer, but I think like that's my take on why the modern church has largely abandoned the world of the imagination, the arts, and beauty. Again, with some really, really striking exceptions, obviously. Mm-hmm. So I think there really are some very striking exceptions, but I would still say, on the whole, I think that's why we've lost it. That's why we're not doing it, and that's why we're losing the culture wars broadly, because we have abandoned one of the central tools that God really does intend for us to take up, which is the cultivation of beauty and the imagination.
Yeah. So you kind of undercut in a good way my theory slightly, but I'm going to bring it forward anyway, particularly to Southern culture.
Right.
So I agree with you on everything with the early church fathers, particularly one that's not quite so early, but still a lot earlier than most people are willing to go back. Augustine of Hippo, his stuff with his struggles with sexual sin and that sort of a thing became such a big thing for him that he forgot to see a lot of the good beauty that God put there for him.
Right.
One of the ways that I tend to look at this sort of thing is, if God's giving you a gift and you're like, "Ooh, I don't want that," that can be. It's not always, because sometimes you're legitimately just trying to be good and careful. But that can be the other side, that people go, "Oh, weaker brother," this, that, or the other. And I'm like, no, I don't want you spitting in the face of God if He's giving you something good, right?
Right.
Communion wine's an example of that, and that's a battle. I know lots of churches are fighting, and it's not a major one that we need to be divided on at this point by any stretch, but it's still one of those things. My theory is something I titled the Nashville divorce, and what this entails is, people think of Hollywood probably first, and then like New York or Vegas kind of second for showbiz in the United States, but Nashville might actually be second. Some people, who are more music minded, they go to Nashville. Well, during your "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" years, your early 1900s and that sort of a thing, a lot of legitimate and illegitimate businessmen were pulling Scots-Irish folk from their mountain homes who could really, really play, and getting them to record and paying them, their contracts and stuff. And then some of them realized, hey, we can do live shows too. We can make even more money selling tickets, right? And so basically, these legitimate and illegitimate businessmen were paying people to leave their homes and their communities, leave their churches, and go out and into the world and do something. Now, that's not in and of itself necessarily bad. If that's what you're called to, that's what you and or your family is called to. But I have a feeling, because things were so rural, because, the potato famine happened and we had all these extra Irish coming in, and all this kinds of stuff during this time, there was this upheaval and move towards so rural a situation where we had nothing but these tiny Baptist churches with who knows where this preacher came from, right? And essentially they had no backbone to help these people, whether with letters or of encouragement or food or whatever. They had no real way to help. And the other people were like, well, if you're not going to help me, then I'm going to have to lean on my manager. I'm going to have to lean on, these guys. And the ones that were illegitimate, and even some of the ones that were legitimate to a certain extent, they ended up essentially becoming their leader, their mentor. We even see this as far as Elvis to a certain extent, right? And part of the reason that he just kept going because he loved what he did, and then he died, right? And so your Dolly Partons, your Johnny Cashes that came later, they're still very Christ haunted. Flannery O'Connor, right? Like they very much so. But there's the people that they end up surrounding themselves with, their community always ends up being liberal because of what they do, pulling people away from their communities.
Yeah.
So my whole question is, especially with the advent of the internet, what can we be doing as a church? I'm not talking pastors necessarily. I'm saying lay people.
Yeah.
What can we do as lay people to encourage folks that do have to travel or have to be in various places where they're just going to be overcome by the world, in order to shine forth that beauty, right?
Right.
It's just something that I see it time and time again. And every time I talk to some of my Nashville friends, and friends of friends, I see it. One of the big ones that really hurt me, quite frankly, hurt me deeply, was during just before COVID. Andrew Peterson put out "Is He Worthy?" You're familiar with the song, and he did a music video and had he didn't mean to all white people there because it's Nashville, and the people who answer our calls for extras and music videos in Nashville are usually white people. Anyway, so they came and a bunch of people made a big stink about it, how it's all white people and this is Revelation. You're supposed to be, and they even say in the song, every tribe, tongue, nation. Why didn't you put them in there? And he tried to walk the middle of the road, but he sort of apologized at the same time, right?
Right.
I agree that it would have been artistically better to have as many different races represented as possible, just for the sake of the song, artistically,
Right.
But that's as far as you should go with that, in my opinion.
Right.
And then when COVID happened and everything else, like, he tried to walk middle road this whole time, and he's still walking middle of the road. His brother is super liberal. I don't believe he is. He's an Anglican, but he's, and so I see this over and over and over again in Nashville, where these guys just get crushed by the woke mob on one side, and the church is going, well, woke gonna be woke instead of helping their brother,
Right.
I just,
yeah. I think that, I like your Nashville theory. I think that works, and I think that fits. And I think it seems to me that all healthy Christian culture is going to flow from healthy Christian community.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't have that Christian community, there's going to be another community that becomes your home, and then over time, when that new home, that new culture becomes your home and your culture, it affects your art. Mm-hmm. It can't help but do that. And so I think that works. And I think that is, a sort of a zoom in a little bit closer in terms of like what's actually happening. I think that's right. I think the church also just frankly needs to teach more on what the Bible says about art and beauty, and its connection to community.
Right.
And so I think, we've talked, the last couple of years since COVID, there's a lot of talk on, more broadly in the culture about building anti-fragile communities, building alternative economies and all these sort of things. Like, do you live in a community where, if things go down really bad, are you, can you provide for your family? Are you safe? Do your neighbors have your back? Can you provide for one another? And I think makes sense given where we're at to be talking about those things, without, going off into crazy prepper land, but, nevertheless, being wise. And I think the same, I think this is what we should have been doing all along. I think we should have been building anti-fragile communities from jump, while not being, isolationists, but nevertheless building Christian communities, church communities, that are where we have real ties, we protect one another, we watch out for one another. Our children grow up. They, and not that, no one can ever leave or you can't take a job somewhere else or whatever, but I think far more rootedness and what that does, I mean, I've actually told this story a couple times. This is not directly connected to arts, but architecture. So kind of
it's still an art, yeah.
Yeah, it's close. But my wife and I were able to build a house during 2020, and we had, I mean, many the general contractor who actually built it is a member of our church. The bank lending manager is a Christian from another church in town. The guy that laid our floors is a Christian from another church in town. The guy that did our plumbing was a Christian from another church out of town. And I mean, just all these Christians coming together, and it wasn't like we planned it this way. It's not like we live in a little Mennonite community, or it's like, even if people think that's what Moscow's like, it's
not.
it's a little more cosmopolitan than that, even though it's a small town. But I was blown away by how many Christians helped us, were involved in it. The people that actually did our architectural drawings are two gals who do this on the side, married mothers who on the side do architectural drawings. And so there's all these things. And the thing that struck me when we were doing this was, it wasn't like anybody was like giving us some kind of screaming deal because we were believers. But what I will say is there was a deep amount of trust between all of us because we were believers.
Right.
And because of that trust, I do believe that the overall risk felt mitigated. Not that Christians can't sin against each other and rip each other off. They can, and they do.
Or even just do bad work by accident.
Yeah, and exactly. And so, write everything down, have contracts, do due diligence. Don't just, spit and shake on it. I don't believe in that kind of thing. But I would say because of the covenant community, there was a greater amount of trust. We were able to work, I think, better together. I also think ultimately everybody came out better. I was glad to pay these people what they were worth. Like, tell me your bill, I'll pay it. I don't care. I want to bless you because you're doing good work for me. And vice versa. I don't think they necessarily had to, add a whole bunch of extra money on to the bill because they weren't afraid of getting ripped off on the other side. Right. When you have that kind of trust, I think everybody comes out ahead. And it's not like anybody's, trying to get the deal. It's everybody's trying to bless each other, and it really comes out better. Well, if that's the case in building a house, which really does have, it is an art. I think the same thing in terms of building anti-fragile community is absolutely essential for cultivating arts in the church and in a Christian culture. I think where you have that kind of trust, that kind of loyalty in a community, a rootedness, and a commitment, and obviously, I'm happy to pay my general contractor. You tell me your fee, I'm going to pay it, and I know he's paying for his kids' Christian education with that. So it's like I'm helping him put food on the table, and his kids are getting raised in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and vice versa. He's providing a home for me where I'm going to be raising my children, and where we're going to be inviting people over from the community because I'm a pastor and we do parties and Bible studies and stuff and psalm sings, and vice versa. We're enabling one another. We're creating space for one another to do what we do and what we're called to. Right. And I think this applies, even though I'm not an artist per se, it absolutely does apply to the artists in the community. When we build that kind of community, and it's healthy and it's thriving and it's based on faithfulness to marriage vows, faithfulness to membership vows, faithfulness to raising our children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. That's the kind of place where artists are going to thrive.
There's a guy, you may know him by name, but you definitely know at least one of his songs, Rich Mullins. You remember the guy? Mm-hmm. Awesome God guy. He wrote a lot of other really great songs, really fantastic poet. Weird guy, was barefoot on stage, performed at a lot of Indian reservations and found their culture really interesting. But he he started sort of liberal, sort of Christian, but toward the end of his life, he died in a car crash in the late 90s. He started to get more almost Calvinistic kind of thing. I think he ended at a Methodist church, but it was a really more grounded kind of one. But he got so fed up with the grind in Nashville. He loved being on the road. He loved traveling, but he hated the grind. And he specifically asked, and he hated any and all accolades that came with it. He would ask random people on the street, "Hey, you want to come play with us?" He'd just see a guy with a guitar, not even playing, right? And they'd be like, "You've never seen me play." He's like, "Nah, come on, we need an extra guy." Right. and so he did this really interesting thing with his church when he just got so fed up with the limelight he was starting to get. When he just started to really catch on, he took his whole check and said, "I want you to send it to my church. And church, I want you to take everything that's not the average American wage, and I want you to take that as tithe right off the top and pay me. You're my employer now." Basically, they said I know that I'm contracting for them, but you're paying my church, and then my church is paying me. And as a result, they gave him as much support as they possibly could,
right,
to make sure that people were with him all the time, because he had a lot of inner demons and stuff he wanted to keep away. So he always wanted to be around someone. He even got psychotic about it sometimes. He was like, "Where'd you go? I can't be alone," et cetera, et cetera. Right. And like, use this to kind of pivot and transition. I think that's a great thing that artists can be doing for their church, even if it's not something quite that lofty. Just making sure that like you're involving the church in whatever you're doing as much as possible. And they might be a little weird about it at first and try to figure it out. 501c3 is one of the worst things to happen when it comes to like taxes and all that other nonsense. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of people now are not a lot of people. I'm starting to hear rumblings about him the same way I heard about Hans Christian Andersen, another weird but godly Christian man, right? Mm-hmm. He was a no-heller, but he was overtly, blatantly a Christian, right? Mm-hmm. Sort of George MacDonald-ish.
Yeah.
There's so many rumors about men like him being gay because they were celibate men, right? And the reason they were celibate wasn't necessarily choice either. I'm starting to hear that a lot about Rich. Rich always said he met someone in Bible college and she broke his heart and he decided he couldn't have anyone else. That's just not going to happen. And he died that way. But I'm starting to hear rumblings about Rich Mullins. Was he really gay? And this is something that we get targeted. All these guys, in one situation or another are getting targeted. They're dead. And then, people go, "Oh man, was he gay?" That's yet another way they get tilted toward the liberals who are, "Oh, we're going to help you, artist. We're going to help you. Come on in. You're just like Rich."
Right.
They start taking out our heroes and targets and whatever else. And right. I'm seeing that a lot. In artistic communities.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't help that I think in the church's abandonment of the arts, in so many respects, the vacuum that has been filled has gone heavily in an effeminate and feminized direction, and sometimes helped by naive and foolish Christians, where a lot of the Jesus junk that I was talking about earlier tends to be very sentimental and effeminate. Mm-hmm. It's all sweetie and saccharine, precious moments and Thomas Kincaid and this kind of thing. When you look back in the history of the church though, and in the history of Western civilization, I mean, some of the most glorious art that's ever been created was made by very, very masculine men. Mm-hmm. And obviously, and there have been some very, very gifted women as well in the arts. But if art is a reflection of the glory of God, and it is, then it is going to be, it's just as it is going to be cultivated by a flourishing Christian community. In the same way, it's going to be that flourishing Christian community is going to be a place that celebrates masculinity and femininity in men and women, because that's where the image of God is displayed. And it's going to be in men loving their manhood, their masculinity, and loving and honoring women rightly, and vice versa, women honoring men rightly and being grateful for their femininity and motherhood and so forth. It's going to be in that milieu, in that furnace, that really beautiful and glorious art is going to be made. But you go back to one of the great poet of the Bible is David. King David is a musician, a poet. He obviously loves the beauty of words and the beauty of music. But that dude was a fighter. That dude was he was a shepherd. He was a soldier. He was a king. He was manly. He was not effeminate. He certainly, talk about the accusation. Of course, he had a very, very close relationship with Jonathan, and so of course they're accused sometimes by the liberals of some kind of homoerotic thing going on. But that's of course not at all what was going on. Our culture's got its head in the gutter, and now it can't think of anything except sewage. But I think it has not helped that frequently our view of beauty has not been in the right way, masculine and feminine. It's been effeminate, egalitarian, it's been, our art has been tranny in certain ways, in that it's been confused and sexually confused for a while and I'd say especially in the last 100 years with the rise of modern art and postmodern art, in a number of different particular arts. But the relativism and so forth of just beauty is only in the eye of the beholder. It's all subjective. It's all relative. Well, that's a tranny move. I mean, that's just in the same way you say that a boy can become a girl or a girl can become a boy. Just give them the right chemicals and the right surgery. I mean, that's what a lot of the turn of the century artists were doing with paint and sculpture and music. I mean, Johnny Cage and Silence or whatever, and similar sorts of splattering paint on canvas and calling it beauty. That was chemical castration for the arts.
Right. Yeah. Going back, I think the other piece that Christians like me can get caught up, Christian artists can get caught up in the beauty, philosophy, heady aspect of things. One of the things that I'm constantly trying to push with my friends is, Doan pushes this and a few other people push this, is kind of not just the doing, although that's a big part of it. Like, do it, practice every day, build your craft, etc. There's a real earthiness to doing that. Like, it's very grounded, but also, the P.T. Barnum sort of nature where you are actually seeking to entertain and edify people with what you're doing beyond just you're shoving into their brain and heart beauty from this sort of like what do you call that, I forget what philosopher was like, just fill their head with knowledge, but you know what I'm saying, right? Yeah. Like, we don't fill heads with knowledge. We present something and they take it or leave it, right? And sometimes they'll take it in a different way, but God works all things together. How can you even believe this if you're not Calvinist, kind of thing, right? Like, but to me, I learned that through DJing. My father was a mobile DJ from, when I was about 9 or so. About when I turned 11, he started taking me to the elementary school parties and things like that, and, teaching me the ropes. And I spent a good 12 to 15 years of my life in that business. And what I learned was I have even beyond like what I'm communicating with the lyrics of the song that I'm playing, like going that deep, right? Beyond that, just getting out there, being as crazy as I can, doing, the really fun dances and getting people going. There's something about communicating to people that there is goodness and beauty, but you do it through something silly or crazy. You see what I'm saying? Like there's something to that. I know you and Doug sometimes don't hold back for that specific reason, to get a rise, right? And so to me, there's an entertainment element that is not entertainment for entertainment's sake, and that seems to be the only thing that a lot of conservative Christians can think of entertainment as. It's completely pointless. There's no point to it whatsoever. Whereas to me, this is the spice rack, right? This is where you pour the spices onto your good, hearty, nutritional meal. This is the sugar. This is the whatever else. This isn't just candy. This is a full meal that you're getting someone to eat. So
yeah, and I think that's exactly right, Joshua. And I don't know if I hope this fits with what you're saying, but immediately was thinking about, I've been reading C.S. Lewis's Four Loves again recently, and he's building off of a very classical understanding of love, going back to Augustine and even building off of Aristotle a bit. But basically the idea that, sort of there's a kind of a hierarchy of loves that, you begin with sort of a really low level with certain kinds of like, he talks about like need love, like, you really need a glass of water and you love water, but you don't like, it's not a really deep, profound love. It's just like, that's how God made you. And, and it sort of slowly ascends. And in this one section I was just reading last night, is talking about how the love of affection is what he calls it, the kind of love of familiar things, the love of your home, the love of your family, the love of your place, the love of smells, and he grants. He actually says, now, if you love your things too much, he says it actually becomes a demon. If you make it a god, it turns into a demon. But there's a lower level love. He says that is just because of the nature of what it is that you're loving. Now, sometimes you might have to give up father and mother for the sake of the gospel. There are higher loves, but he says you can't just throw this love out, because he says it's in the love of family. It's in the love of your favorite breakfast. It's in the love of, the smell of, mom's house, or, the things that you're familiar to. He says that you're actually practicing to love the greater things. And he says a person who doesn't learn to love his own family well is not likely to learn to love his neighbor and humanity well. How he paraphrases 1 John when he says, how can someone say that he loves humanity whom he has not seen if he does not love his own neighbor whom he has seen every day? Right. And I think there's a similar way in which the love of lesser beauty and lesser arts is not useless or worthless at all. The P.T. Barnum, the comedic, just the silly or the fun. I think loving those things in the right way, understood in the right way, is actually practice for loving profoundly beautiful things. Loving the circus tune is in the right way, understood in the right place, and put on the right shelf, is actually practice for loving St. Matthew's Passion by Bach.
That's right.
But it's easy to flip it around. I can't remember who it was. There's some modern comedian who said, everybody wants to save the world, but no one wants to help mom do the dishes.
Right.
And it's a similar kind of thing. Everybody wants the high things, and nobody wants the low things that you need as the steps to getting to the high things. Right. And so I think you're absolutely right. The love and the enjoyment of the lower forms of beauty, folk beauty and pop beauty, even understood in the right ways and understood, putting them in the right places, is actually training for, practice for, and actually making room for. It's in that delight. It's in the milieu of that joy, dancing to just, silly pop music or whatever, It's actually practice for the profound beauty and the profound love.
One of the things that we did DJing that always stood out to me. My last song was a song that we would always close the show, close the main like grand prize of the show. We might play a few more songs or whatever, but like the main grand prize of the show, which the kids would be dancing for the entire time. We've specialized in kids parties, right? They'd be dancing the whole time knowing that there's this big grand prize coming and they know what it is and they're all excited. It was a song called Move It Like This by the Baha Men. And the chorus is just, can you move it like this? And they say, and then we do a call and response. I can shake it like that. Simple thing, right? Yeah. It ends with the chorus fading out. Can you move it like this? I can shake it like that. Sometimes we get them to call and response so loud that they do it 3 or 4 times after the song ended.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is actually happening here? This is people who've gathered together for an event, a birthday party, a holiday party, whatever it might be, getting together, screaming, moving their body, glorying in what God's given them. And it, like, even as a teenager, it always stuck out to me and made me misty-eyed that this goofy little song by the guys who did Who Let the Dogs Out, right? It's causing such, and it's not the song, it's what we're doing, right? And that was the thing that was so amazing, because when the song fades out, there's still these people who love each other or have a passing connection to each other, celebrating together.
Yeah.
And enjoying something that God gave them, whether they know it or not.
Right.
Like, that kind of glory is there, and it so transcends all the fact that I'm playing it, what I'm playing it on, how the electrical signal is getting here, right? It's so far beyond. It's like C.S. Lewis in Narnia with Ramandu and everything else. It's not what a star, even in your world, that's not what a star is, but only what it is made of. Right. So yeah, I find there's the line from P.T. Barnum. He said one time, he's reported as saying at one point, the most noble job, I wouldn't agree with most noble, but one of the most noble, I would say, is that of making other people happy. I think that right there is, I mean, if we can do that, that is inherently showing the gospel on a subliminal level.
Well, and it's profoundly incarnational. Mm-hmm. So I know that can be used as sort of a buzzword, but God became flesh. I mean, it's I don't know when this recording is going to air, but it's Christmas, and God became flesh for us and for our salvation. And he became a particular man at a particular time in history, and he did what needed to be done to save us from our sins. And so the notion of serving particular people, I think is really, really profound, Joshua. And I think art, because again, I've got actually there's an advanced mathematics professor at WSU, Washington State University, that I'm friends with. He's actually the head of the department, brilliant man, and he is like, he hates the wokeness, he hates the all the stuff. He's actually Iranian. He actually grew up in Iran. It's a really cool story, and came to America because as a high schooler, he would visit the American embassy in Tehran, and he actually started a club that he called the Western Christian Club as a nominal Muslim boy in high school in Tehran, because they would go together, these Iranian kids, to the American embassy, and this is in the 70s, and they would put on records of Mozart and Bach and read Shakespeare together. That's awesome. And he's told me many times, he'll say, Toby, Islam could never make anything that beautiful.
Yeah.
Only Christianity can make something that beautiful. And he was determined to come to the States, and he did, and he's been living here for a number of years now. But he says, I hate the wokeness. He hates the English departments, the philosophy departments. He says, he says, you know, if I could, he says, if I could pick my neighbor, he says, I never want to live next to a university professor. He says, I want to live next to a garbage collector.
There you go.
And he's like, legit. He's like, and I said, I'm like, why? And he's like, because they're connected. They're still connected to this world.
Yeah.
Like they have to deal with the raw reality of people.
Why do you think Tolkien made Sam a gardener?
Yeah, exactly. but when you know people where they are in their incarnate particularities, and you serve them and you bless them and you make them happy, that's love.
Right.
And it's practicing again for the greater loves. But you can't do it without the knowledge of and the care for people in their particular places. I know you don't like Tolkien at all, but I'll bring Tolkien into this conversation. I'm working on an article for my blog. It'll probably go up, I don't know, later today or tomorrow, but on the friendship of Legolas and Gimli. And you I mean, one of the most striking dynamics in the Lord of the Rings. And what begins as sort of this, pretty high resentment and skepticism of one another's races of elves and dwarves. And there's a bunch of history and you probably know the lore even better than I do, but there's reason why the elves and dwarves have this, this skepticism of one another. And then of course the elves of Mirkwood had held the family of Gimli in prison shortly, momentarily in the Hobbit, and but Gandalf, at the door of Durin, at the open entry to the mines of Moria, says it wasn't always this way. Elves and dwarves used to be friends, and you all. And they have a little back and forth. Well, it wasn't the dwarves. It wasn't the elves. And Gandalf says, would you guys at least try to be friends? Because we need to work on this. And of course, that's what begins to happen in the mines, and then in Lothlorien in particular. But one of the things that, they're so competitive, they have such fierce loyalty and love for their ways. For particular places, and for the ways of the elves, and for the ways of the dwarves, and the beauty, particularly, of their ways, the beauty of the elves and the trees and the way that they do life, and the beauty of the caves, and the beauty of the jewels, and the ways that the dwarves do life. And of course, after Helm's Deep, on their way to Isengard, they as he's describing, he was so sad that he didn't get to see the caves in Helm's Deep, and it's so moving that Legolas says, that is so moving. If we ever make it out of all this alive, would you take me back and show me the caves, and I'd like to take you back through Fanghorn actually, and show you the beauty of Fanghorn. And then go see the mines of Helm's Deep, and they agree to that, and it says they do later on, and when they did, Legolas comes out of the mines speechless, and Tolkien has some kind of line in there where he says something like, not sure it ever happened that an elf was speechless in the presence of a dwarf. But this beautiful friendship is developed that's centered on the love of particular beauties. And then by that point, these civilizations have very developed high beauties. But I would agree with you completely. I think it all started with local beauty, simple beauty, laughter, dancing, and singing the chorus, 5 more times, even after the music is faded. And I think I love my kids are at the classical Christian school here in town at Logos, and have a son now at New St. Andrews College. But they do dances here, and a lot of sort of folk style dances. But it's the kid, like, I love watching them because they run for an hour and a half basically. Like, they don't stop running, and there's dances and everything, but they're like. They do all the dances sort of at like double speed, and and there's some line dancing mixed in, and these things, and they some of the modern pop music is mixed into it, but it's just, as you note, it's exuberance, it's joy, and yet what I see happening is it's building a community, it's building camaraderie, it's building loves and enjoyment, and it's that kind of love and enjoyment and gladness and exuberance in God's goodness, in music, in bodies, in boys and girls, men and women, and it's that actually is going to produce, I think, even more glorious art and beauty in the coming generations.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, I am going to wrap the official podcast here, and then I have one more thing to tell you, and then we can rock. Everybody remember, Toby, do you have anything to plug?
Well, all the things.
All the things. Canon Plus, all the good stuff.
Yeah, Canon Plus, Cross Politic is a cultural
Your
political
blog,
podcast.
Having Two Legs.
Having Two Legs. TobyJSumpter.com is my blog where I write. It's my website. And yeah, Canon Plus, Logos School,
Politic.
New St. Andrews College, Cross Politic, all the things.
Yep. All right. Well, everybody, be your family's bard. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and the Lord will be with you wherever you go. Follow us, and we'll see you next time in the trenches on Poets at War.
God of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betray thee, one sword at least thy right shall guard, one faithful heart shall praise thee.
If these words awoke within you a stirring and radiant fire, please remember even a bard is worthy of his wages and hire. Go to joshuadavidling.com/support to support me and my family.